This video is brought to you by Brilliant. The first 800 people to sign up at brilliant.org/badversion will get 20% off their annual subscription. Remember when arguing about Star Wars was fun? The Last Jedi. It seems like you either love it or you hate it, and whichever side you're on, the other side thinks you're a complete idiot. You know what this reminds me of? The dress. Remember back in 2015 when the entire internet was locked in a heated argument over whether the dress was black and blue or white and gold? Everybody was looking at the same picture, but somehow our brains divided us cleanly into two camps of people who so firmly, deeply believed that they were right that they couldn't even imagine how somebody else could see it differently without having something wrong with them. This pattern kind of repeated itself in the 2016 election, and while in both cases there are objectively right and wrong answers, the way we talk about this stuff matters. I think the reasons why some people loved The Last Jedi and the reasons why some people hated it aren't incompatible. It's just that Star Wars means different things to different people. Some folks want epic space battles and laser swords, and other folks want operatic drama. Neither side is wrong, but the haters do have a core set of complaints. My biggest complaint is that The Last Jedi feels more like an ending than a middle act. I didn't leave the theater dying to know what happens next, and I think what really turns people off is that lack of anticipation. A lot of threads feel closed in a way that suggests there's nowhere else to go. Picking apart somebody else's work is easy, but that's not really in the spirit of what we do here. I don't want to talk about Episode 8 or what it should have done differently. Let's all just accept that The Last Jedi happened, and instead of saying that it ruined Star Wars forever, let's see if we can come up with a final act that could give this trilogy and the saga a satisfying ending. Maybe if we can recontextualize The Last Jedi with a satisfying Episode 9, the things that bothered us will either make more sense or at least not distract us from enjoying the story as a whole. When Empire ended, we had some clear unresolved conflicts. Han was in the hands of Boba Fett, and we had just gotten our first glimpse of the Emperor, and Luke had a bombshell revelation dropped on him about his father. The last shot of the movie is the Rebel fleet parked on the edge of the galaxy. They're working on a plan, but they're on the outside looking in. We understood the conflicts, and we knew what to hope for. The Last Jedi leaves us in a place of relative comfort. Sure, the Resistance is down to a few stragglers, but we aren't left with any clear questions in need of answers. They found Luke, and he's dead now. Rey's parents were nobodies. And with Snoke gone, there's really nothing stopping Kylo Ren from doing whatever the hell he wants. I suppose he could spend all of the First Order's resources tracking down the last of the Resistance, but meh. That paints Kylo Ren as kind of an idiot. An evil for the sake of being evil character, and since he's arguably the most interesting character in the new trilogy, it'd be a shame to see him wasted like that. We also have a real world problem. Word has it that Episode 9 was supposed to revolve around Leia in the same way that 7 and 8 revolved around Han and Luke, respectively. But with Carrie Fisher's passing, there's no way to do that without some Rogue One style CGI, and that feels awkward and disrespectful. So now what? Where do our heroes go from here? Are you ready for some fan fiction? Here's the bad version of Star Wars Episode 9. The opening crawl tells us that several years have passed since The Last Jedi. Where A New Hope started by telling us about a period of galactic civil war, our crawl says that this is a period of peace. The First Order has found some success in restoring things under the leadership of Supreme Leader Kylo Ren, but there's still some internal political conflict. Meanwhile, the Resistance is struggling to rebuild their ranks in the face of Kylo's unexpected popularity, and their morale is especially struggling with a sudden and unexpected loss. The crawl ends and the camera pans down to a Resistance ship. Through the fighter base shields, we see the Millennium Falcon behind our heroes, who are all dressed in black. There's no score, only the hum of the ship's engines. Something is wrong. Look, the audience knows there's no way to avoid that, so there's no sense in dragging it out. Leia is gone, and it should feel like a punch in the gut. Her loss should be as heavy in the movie as it is to the movie. And we could leave it at that and move on, but Carrie Fisher is too important to the saga to just simply hand-wave her out of the story. This can and should still be Leia's movie, so let's find another way to make it about her. If the circumstances of her death are somewhat vague, we have a lot of room to play, like maybe Poe has been serving directly under Leia for these past few years and is the heir apparent to the Resistance. And while he's upset, he's unconvinced that she's actually gone. Maybe there was hollow footage of her ship being destroyed, but because of the circumstances, her body was never found. Let's say that she was on a diplomatic mission and her shuttle was ambushed or sabotaged. Grief-stricken and in denial, Poe insists on setting out to investigate and find answers. Or maybe he even blames himself for not being there to protect her. Whatever, it should be his character, not the plot itself, that pushes him forward. And Finn, now a general, doesn't think this is a job for the leader of the Resistance, but he sees how hard Poe is hit by his mentor's death and agrees to go with him, if only to keep him from getting himself killed. Meanwhile, Rey's been reading those Jedi books she stole from Luke, and since her exposure to Force powers has been way weirder than most of her predecessors, she's getting a little more experimental. Episode 7 was called The Force Awakens. What does that mean exactly? We saw Kylo Ren stop a blaster bolt in midair at the beginning of The Force Awakens. And in The Last Jedi, we saw Snoke using the Force to create a psychic link, and we even saw Luke project himself across the galaxy just to troll Kylo Ren. This could just be a matter of writers looking for fresh things to do with the Force, but that closing scene with the Broom Kid hints that maybe something bigger is happening. Like, maybe after purging the Jedi and then removing all of the big, overpowered super characters like the Emperor and Vader and Yoda and Snoke and Luke from the game, the Force really has awakened. So let's say there's a fresh new wave of potential Jedi, and Rey's doing some Cerebro stuff in hopes of finding them all and training them before somebody else gets to them. I like the idea of Rey approaching them remotely, like appearing in dreams or visions and guiding them to her, like with Obi-Wan telling Luke to go to Dagobah. She should definitely have some students with her already, like maybe she started a small school on Luke's island since it's the only real training ground she's ever known, and because there's no real Jedi Master to lead them, the school could be set up as more of like everyone learning and experimenting together. Like maybe the Jedi would have lasted longer if they would have spent more time exploring the Force and less time just like dictating stuff to each other. Some of Rey's conflict in the story can come from her difficulties as a teacher, but the easy out there would be conflict with one or more of her students, and that ground has been pretty well covered already. It would also put too much focus on a bunch of new student characters we aren't really invested in. We're too deep into the story for that. But it can lead to Luke returning as a ghost to offer Rey advice when she hits a wall. That feels pretty Star Wars. And how about along the way, as she brings more students together, Rey discovers that they can work together to amplify their Force powers. This could come in handy later. So Finn and Poe are off looking for answers with BB-8. Rey and Chewie are hopping around finding new Jedi, so who's left? Oh right. Rose is probably back with the fleet. Her adventure with Finn was the weak link in The Last Jedi, and I don't really want to spend too much of the last movie on this trilogy's Jar Jar. We can put her in charge of the fleet, or we can give her a lead engineer role, but either way she can act as our anchor character to keep us updated on the Resistance while everybody else is out having adventures. So that's what our heroes are up to, but what about the First Order? Kylo Ren has had the most interesting character arc so far, and he has no clear analog in the saga right now. He started the trilogy as a petulant child throwing tantrums, but he ended The Last Jedi somewhat reborn, having successfully killed his master and taken control of the First Order. More than Anakin ever accomplished. Sure, he didn't manage to wipe out the Resistance entirely, but it would be a waste to say he spent the last few years on a revenge mission. There's a great scene in The Last Jedi where Kylo asks Rey to join him and rule together. It's an echo of similar scenes from earlier in the saga, but with a twist. Kylo seems bent on throwing away the old ways and moving forward. So instead of making him a new Emperor or a new Snoke, I think it would be way more interesting to follow that logic. Rather than rule through fear, Supreme Leader Kylo Ren has torn down the trappings of the evil Empire. No more Jedi, no more Sith, no more Resistance. He's doing what his grandfather never could. He's brought balance to the Force, and he believes that he alone has brought peace to the galaxy. And he's mostly right. Fighting has stopped while the Resistance is on the run, and he's turned his military into a force for peace. The First Order is focused on police work, helping out with regional disputes and spending more time on peacekeeping than displays of military power. Weirdly, Kylo Ren has turned out to be a pretty effective and popular leader. Now, the old school tropey thing to do here would be for Kylo to secretly be working on some kind of super weapon to maintain his power, but super weapons have been done to death, and our pal Kylo knows how well that worked out for the Emperor and Snoke, so he's gonna swing the other way. Let's say the First Order has been installing planetary shields all over the galaxy to make sure that nothing like the Death Star or Starkiller base can ever happen again. Basically, he wants to make sure that nobody can build a super weapon. Of course, this consumes a ton of resources, but it means improved security, so nobody really thinks to ask too many questions about how the First Order is pulling this off. And that's how it would really work in real life. Like, if you're just some random citizen on some random planet and your entire life has been spent in some state of conflict or war, and then some dude comes along and starts keeping the peace and helping everybody and building free shields, you'd be like, yeah, dude, keep it up. What could the Resistance possibly have to offer? This could also explain why the Resistance isn't being hunted down by the First Order. There's no real need to. Bad guys are more interesting when they think they're the good guys. Sure, Kylo referred to himself as a monster to Rey, but I think that was more introspection than aspiration. And maybe since the death of Snoke, he's moved on from being Skeletor evil to genuinely ruling the galaxy the way he thinks is best. But Kylo Ren is still Kylo Ren, and the ego high of his popularity is only masked as imbalance. Early on, we see him meditating, trying to see his path forward through the Force. But he's interrupted by a vision of Snoke, which really freaks him out. He attacks with his lightsaber and Snoke disappears, but he's visibly shaken. Sometime later, it happens again, maybe a few times. Snoke taunts Kylo and calls him weak or mocks his peace efforts as being doomed to fail. And to drive this point home, we should have a couple of scenes where Hux starts to see Kylo's wavering confidence, and he obviously intends to take advantage of this weakness because we get glimpses throughout the movie of Hux communicating and conspiring with someone. But back to Poe and Finn. Rian Johnson said that the Finn and Rose storyline was originally supposed to be Finn and Poe, but he realized that you could swap their dialogue and nobody would really notice the difference. I agree insofar as the versions of Finn and Poe we got in The Last Jedi are fairly interchangeable, but I don't think this is inherent to the characters. Finn is a reluctant hero, a deserter who is looking for a way out but stumbled into purpose, where Poe is headstrong and wants to be in charge of everything, running into trouble with his guns blazing. If you approach it more like the Han-Luke dynamic in A New Hope, things start to make a lot more sense. It also helps if you give them something fresh to do that isn't just busy work that doesn't matter to the plot. Their story should unfold as a murder mystery, with clues taking them to unexpected and sometimes familiar locations, acting as a kind of tasteful Star Wars wrap-up nostalgia tour. If we're gonna get a Lando cameo, it should happen here. We'll just have to be careful not to overdo it. We only need enough to tie the saga together a little bit more. But as they investigate, nothing adds up, and Finn grows increasingly concerned with Poe's obsession. They kind of did the murder mystery thing in Attack of the Clones, with Obi-Wan following the clues from the bounty hunter, but the whole thing fell flat because Obi-Wan didn't really have anybody to play off of, other than his droid. So let's take a second to talk about tone. Star Wars is at its best when the humor is born out of the situation, especially when the characters use it as a tool to cope with stress. As a test, does the story still make sense if you cut the joke? Leia telling Han that she'd just as soon kiss a Wookiee fits the scene, and it tells us something about the characters. If we remove it, we lose something valuable about Han and Leia's relationship. Compare this to Jar Jar stepping in poo or Luke milking a giant island monster. Whether or not you think those are funny, they don't add anything to the story. With Finn and Poe, we could get dry one-liners, but the overall tone should get more and more tense as they go along, with Poe becoming obsessed with the mystery and Finn losing faith that it's going to lead anywhere. This relationship specifically feels like rich ground for natural, tonally appropriate comedy. Both characters use comedy as a defense mechanism, and I think it would be interesting to watch them use humor to talk around their real feelings about the situation. And as they get deeper into it, the tension can reveal itself more and more through them speaking more directly. In this way, the whole movie can find its lighter and darker moments without forcing anything. Tensions are high, and the path leads them to Maz, who maybe knows a little bit more than she's been letting on. Not that she was directly involved, but because she deals in information, maybe she had some intel that could have saved Leia, but didn't act on it in time. This leads to a big blow-up confrontation, with Poe losing his cool and putting a blaster in her face. Finn steps in, yelling the whole thing's a waste of time. Leia's gone and there's nothing they can do about it, but the Resistance still needs Poe. Poe feels the weight of this, and he's taken aback. He agrees, and he's ready to pack it in. Contrite, Maz agrees to give them access to the encrypted messages she's intercepted to see if there's anything in there that could help them. I like this because it takes Finn, a low-level stormtrooper deserter who is reluctant to join anything, and makes him the voice of reason for Poe pulling himself back together. It also takes two of our comic relief characters and gives them something heavier to carry. They can use the drama to earn the comedy. I think the actors can handle it, and I think the audience would appreciate seeing them grow closer, if fan art is any indication. And then, just as they're about to head back to the base, BB-8 finds the bombshell, an encrypted message from Leia herself. It turns out not everybody in the First Order leadership agreed with Kylo Ren's style. Hux has his sights on taking the throne, and he's built a back door into all of those planetary defense shields. Turns out if you overload them just right, they go pop and take the planet with them. Surprise! We have a super weapon after all, and it's capable of destroying literally every planet in the galaxy. Good luck finding an exhaust port to stop that. In the hologram, Leia reveals that she'd been given this information by a defecting First Order officer, but a mole on Leia's crew sabotaged her ship to make sure the information never reached the Resistance. Leia's final act was ensuring the data got out, an echo of her first act in the saga, storing the Death Star plans on R2-D2. This gives Leia's death meaning and weight in this story. Her character still matters. Leia still saves the galaxy. It would be jarring and disrespectful to reanimate Carrie Fisher via CGI, but there's likely enough footage of her on the cutting room floor to cobble something together for a staticky hologram video. If it's done tastefully, it'll carry the impact we all want. We'll relate to Poe's emotional reaction to seeing her again because we feel the same way. Meanwhile, Rey starts trying to reach out to Kylo to try and connect with him like she did when Snoke was manipulating them. And at first, Kylo thinks it's just a hallucination like Snoke, but over time, Rey gains his trust, and he starts to see things for what they really are. Then Hux plays his ace. He surrounds Kylo Ren's command ship and seizes control of the First Order by revealing that it was Kylo Ren who attacked Snoke, not Rey. Hux uses the shield backdoor to destroy a few planets, but he blames it on Kylo, using this as his excuse to attack Kylo's ship. The Resistance shows up under Poe's command to defend Kylo, and we get our epic space battle. Then Snoke appears to Kylo Ren again, but this time it's different. Alright, this gives us a chance to solve a couple of problems from The Last Jedi and tie off a loose end from the prequels. Snoke is a fascinating character. He's clearly someone. Nobody gains that much power in the Force and becomes supreme leader without some kind of super interesting backstory. But by killing him off entirely, we waste all of that potential. I get that subverting the trope was the point and that Kylo had to step into power to avoid being a dull repeat of Vader, but Snoke wasn't crafted to be a throwaway character. If the point was just to give Kylo somebody to answer to, Hux would have been good enough, or some other random military type. It would have made perfect sense and it wouldn't have disappointed the audience. Grand Moff Tarkin was killed off in a single movie and nobody's clamoring for his backstory. But when you put a character like Snoke on screen, you're making an implicit promise to the audience that there's an interesting payoff coming. In Episode 3, there's a scene at the opera where Palpatine tells Anakin the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Basically, there was a dude named Darth Plagueis who was so powerful that he could even manipulate the Force to create life. Palpatine says that it's possible to use this power to save Padme. We later find out that Palpatine killed him and never unlocked that particular power, and then it just kind of never came up again. Now, if someone masters life and death, it isn't a huge leap to assume that being killed isn't the end of their story. In fact, let's tie off another loose end from the prequels. Yoda's reveal that it was Qui-Gon who learned how to stick around as a Force ghost. This is new stuff for the Jedi, so maybe being a Force ghost is just the first step in a two-step process. What happens if the bad guys figure out the ghost thing? Like if you collect enough power as a Force ghost, you can regain your physical form, but since you're basically just reanimating your corpse, you start to collect some interesting scars if you do this a lot. Plagueis Reborn is a pretty good explanation of where Snoke came from and why he's so powerful and why his face looks like that. Here's where we can turn a loss into a win. Simply revealing Snoke to be Plagueis would be boring because it would end up coming down to expositional dialogue to explain how he came back from the dead and took power. But by killing him in the second movie, we can use the third to show what that process actually looks like, and along the way, the audience can mentally fill in the gaps for how it went down the first time. We only need a single line of dialogue to reveal him as Plagueis, and it doesn't even have to be that overt. Enough to please the fans, but not so much as to slow down the story. So this time when Snoke appears, we realize that he wasn't just a hallucination. He was distracting Kylo and working with Hux to cause enough destruction for him to restore himself. And if the destruction of one planet would cause a great disturbance in the Force... So Kylo takes a few swings, but he's literally fighting a ghost, so Snoke just regenerates out from under him. Rey shows up with her new Jedi trainees, and they try to help, but Snoke just freezes them all in place and taunts them, because he's a dick like that. And here's where all the psychic Force stuff starts to make sense. Kylo, Rey, and the students link up psychically to amplify their power to suppress Snoke. But even then, they can only hold him, not destroy him. Luke appears alongside them to join the psychic battle. And then Yoda, and then Obi-Wan, and Anakin, and Qui-Gon. Every Jedi who survived in the Force spends the last of their energy to take Snoke down, including, wait for it, Leia. It's her power that seals the battle. This is going to take some very thoughtful filmmaking to pull off well, but what I'm imagining here is something like Doctor Who, where they occasionally show images of past incarnations of the Doctor. If it's done well, it lands. It's a gamble, but part of the point here is to give the audience the feeling that every movie in the story has contributed something to this ending. We also want to give them a sense of finality. By having the Force ghosts work together, we remove these characters from play completely. No more showing up to offer advice or burn down libraries later. This really is the end. We really are saying goodbye. Now with Snoke gone, Hux is set off balance and attempts to retaliate by destroying more systems. He pounds his fists into the console himself to trigger it, but instead of devastation, he's greeted by a hologram of Maz, who's hacked in and disabled the shields entirely, completing her arc. We finish the story with shots of reactions from around the galaxy, like at the end of Return of the Jedi. Except instead of celebration, it's a sense of sober realization. Nobody really knows how to feel. They've seen tentative peace before. Why would they believe it can last this time? We land on Kylo and Rey watching from the command ship. Rey asks, what now? But Kylo's arc has made him realize what everybody else in the galaxy has realized. There's nothing to celebrate. There's always going to be men like Snoke and Hux. No one person should have this much power and control. The role of the Jedi should be to protect democracy, not to rule. Kylo says that he wishes he could have died stopping Snoke so that he could be remembered forever as a hero, alluding to the way that Vader went out. Rey says, the galaxy's full of heroes. Be remembered for what you build. A little heavy-handed, maybe, but that's opera. This movie has to work in two ways. It has to close out the trilogy and it has to close out the entire saga. And there needs to be a bigger moral to the Roman numeral Star Wars movies. I see this trilogy as a coming-of-age story. The prequels were about death and decay. The Jedi, the Republic, all of that innocence is gone. The original trilogy is about rebirth, a new hope, the return of something. George Lucas talked about how things in the prequels echoed the original trilogy like music. Everything should rhyme. This is a compelling idea, and we see it throughout the saga, especially in The Force Awakens. Where The Last Jedi succeeds is in breaking some of these patterns, and I think that doing this in the penultimate movie sets us up for an interesting last chapter. The moral of the story is that we'll never really move forward until the patterns are broken. The third trilogy is all about how complicated happily ever after can be. You can't just defeat the Emperor and reset everything back to the way it was. You have to learn and grow and rebuild. We are what they grow beyond, Yoda said. I think that's the whole point. It needs a more mature and thoughtful ending. It may not seem as joyous or as hopeful as the end of Return of the Jedi, but now that the people of our galaxy far, far away have effectively had the spell broken, they can finally move on and build their own peace. Together. The war between light and dark belongs to everyone, not just a handful of super beings deciding the fate of the universe. The last chapter in a saga like this needs to pull from everything that came before. Every moment in the first 8 movies needs to have been always driving us to this. The ending needs to be inevitable, obvious in hindsight. Like the Force, it needs to bind everything together. Padme's passion for democracy, Qui-Gon's discovery of force powers beyond the Jedi, the decades of war that have torn the galaxy apart time and time again, Luke's sacrifice, all of it has to matter. As a side note, I think the trailers for this movie should be carefully selected audio clips from the first 8 movies played over an Episode 9 logo. Everyone in the world is going to see this movie. Get them hyped, but let them all go in blind. So that's the bad version, but this is Star Wars, and I'm absolutely certain that you have notes, and I would love to hear all of your ideas in the comments. If you're interested in learning the ways of the Force and becoming a Jedi, you should train with the Jedi Masters at Brilliant.org. You can learn how to balance the light side and the dark in Tug of War, how drag works in the vacuum of space, or which of Yoda's lightsaber gymnastics require the most energy. Like Rey's experimentation-focused training setup, Brilliant uses problem solving to allow you to discover the solutions, rather than having them dictated to you. If only the Jedi of the Old Republic had done things that way. If you ever get stuck, don't worry, the answers will reveal themselves if you ask. And if you need clarity, just report the problem and the Jedi Masters who created the tests will appear at your side to show you the truth.
From a certain point of view.
And just for you, the first BB 800 people to sign up at Brilliant.org/bad version will get 20% off the annual subscription when they become a Padawan.